Good morning. Welcome to the Roseate Tern Momentum webinar. Apologies that it's my face that you should see first, but things can only get better. It's a great pity that we can't meet in person to embrace, share a few anecdotes over a drink and laugh at our lockdown hair and beard disasters. But unfortunately, we're in a world of Zoom and we've got to make the most of this situation. So we'll try and make today's event as interactive as we possibly can. And at this point, I just want to acknowledge the wizards behind the scenes, Rebecca and Gabby, who will be managing the presentations and dealing with the questions and comments that we hope you'll be sending in. I've just got to briefly go through a few housekeeping points before Martin launches the day. So firstly, as you'll be aware, all the sessions will be recorded and all will be available on the Roseate Tern project website after the event, so you'll be able to access them there. The program is broken down into a series of presentations, and after each there'll be an opportunity to deal with specific questions arising. Most of the speakers have pre-recorded their talks, so we should be able to keep strictly to timing, but no doubt even with that there will still be some questions that remain unanswered live, but we'll make sure that everyone gets a thorough and informed reply from any questions that they put in, so probably not from me in that case. So if you do have questions, you will see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and you can pop your questions on there. If there are any other points that you want to raise, if you could pop those on the chat box. And as I say, everything will be, after each presentation, the chair of that session will then ask the questions that have been posted to the presenter. So I think that deals with all the important housekeeping points, and at this point I'll hand over to Martin to open the webinar.
Morning, Lee. Morning, everybody else. And outrageous comments about hair and facial hair growth. Lee, outrageous. Should be yellow carded for that. Anyway, it's my job this morning really to set the scene and also to chair the first session. And that's what I'm going to do now, probably about 7 or 8 minutes or so. And I'm going to start by saying that in 1992, I fell in love. It's why I visited the Northumberland coast for the first time that year, because my new girlfriend's family had a hut on the coast just north of Almouth. It's pretty basic, positioned on an eroding cliff, but it had the most amazing view across the sea out to the incredible Coquet Island and its lighthouse. I stayed in love, got married, which is why every year for the past 28 years, I've headed to our hut on the Northumberland coast, and Coquet has been in my line of sight ever since. And Coquet, as you'll hear a lot from my colleague Paul in due course, has been home to the UK's only breeding colony of our rarest seabird, Roseate Tern. And over the past 28 years, while I've looked out over Coquet from my hut, this species has been on a bit of a seasonal roller coaster. And for most of these years, the population was really struggling. But 5 years ago, things began to look up. And this is obviously thanks to the 5-year EU life-funded partnership project between the RSPB, Birdwatch Ireland, and the North Wales Wildlife Trust, and other partners as well you will hear from later today. And over the next 2 days, you're going to hear from those who've been the driving force behind the Roseate Tern Momentum project, and they're going to be sharing the results, explain what we've achieved, outline how the species is doing in other parts of its range, and offer views on how we can address some future challenges. And really what I want to do in this brief contextual talk is to explain why this matters, how it fits into the RSPB's wider strategy, and what the implications are for this project. So why is the RSPB involved, and why does this matter? Well, I woke up this morning to the latest dew-laden statistic, WWF have just released their Living Planet report, and that's revealed that global wildlife populations have plummeted by an average of 68% since when I was born in 1970. And this is despite the fact that we've had global commitments to halt the loss of biodiversity under the Convention on Biological Diversity, with targets meant to be met by 2020. And WWF's report today precedes the UN's own Global Biodiversity Outlook, which is going to be published next week, and no doubt with the same punchline that we have failed to stem the tide of loss. Yes, it is pretty gloomy, but we don't give up, which is why the RSPB is next week going to be launching a new campaign to try and turn things around. And we're working with loads of other conservation organisations to try and influence the new global convention, the new ambition, which will hopefully be set in Kunming in China next year. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to bend the curve, restore wildlife populations to 1970 levels. And key measures for success will be our ability to increase the overall abundance of species populations, protect and restore the integrity of natural habitats, and of course, recover threatened species. Now, Professor Sir John Lawton's seminal report on how to provide more space for nature, he talks of the importance of creating more, bigger, better, and joined protected areas. And we agree, which is why we're calling on governments around the world to support a new target of 30% of land and seas to be well protected and managed by 2030. But this on its own will never be enough. This is why it must be supported by targeted action to recover our most threatened species. And this is why species recovery has always been and will always be part at the core of the RSPB strategy. It's why we set targets for species on and off our nature reserves. It's why we report annually on how we're doing to celebrate success and to try and work out what to do when things are not getting better. We developed a tried and tested approach to species recovery, and we work with others to monitor what's happening to wildlife populations, identify which species are in trouble, and then prioritize those which are in need of action. We then do diagnostic research to work out why a species might be declining, and then we develop and test solutions. And we look to then roll out successful solutions to try and meet our ultimate ambition of lasting recovery. And of course, Roseate Tern has been one such priority, getting the species recovery treatment. When it comes to Roseate Tern, as you'll hear, we've known the reasons for decline, whether it's to do with predation, displacement, disturbance, loss of nesting sites because of sea level rise, food availability, but also growing threat of development at sea. And what the LIFE project set out to achieve was really a number of key objectives: to improve the productivity at nesting sites by improving the breeding conditions, to prepare habitats, to make them better really, to enable recolonization, to improve our knowledge of what's going on with the species or ecology, particularly around its diet, and then to try and create a network of Roseate Tern conservationists to share experiences, and most of you are now part of that network. And of course, our ultimate ambition is to develop a long-term and lasting strategy, which means that the work that we're doing over the last 5 years has a really sound legacy. And as you'll hear over the last 2 days, and as most of you who are coming to this webinar will be aware, the results have been just really positive. And I just want to take this moment to just congratulate everyone who's been involved in this project for the impact that you've had. There will be lessons that we'll share and learn from this conference, but I want to land a few early because to my mind, targeted species recovery must always be part of any future conservation strategy. It works, and as we've shown with loads of other species, whether it's corncrake, stone curlew, white-tailed eagle, gyps vultures, albatrosses, we can turn things around and make things better. And this should make us optimistic about the future. But we need to make sure we have the right conditions in place to make this happen, to allow us to continue to be optimistic. I say this with a heavy heart. This is one of my last times I'll be able to be grateful for EU LIFE funding. This funding stream has been at the heart of so many conservation success stories over the past few years. And of course, UK's exit from the EU will mean that we'll no longer have access to the £420 million worth of environmental funding that's available every year. We're going to find new ways of collaborating with others across borders. But it's also why we absolutely need to have the right ambition globally to restore threatened species, and to back that up, we need legal targets to drive nature's recovery at home, which is why we're calling across the UK, all the 4 administrations across the UK, to establish new legislation to do just that. And we also want those legal targets to include targets to improve the status of threatened species like Roseate Tern. And of course, ultimately, we need to have the adequate funding to really back all this up and to make it happen. For now, though, and thanks to the work of Momentum and the results you will hear about, I'm pretty much going to be sitting back as if I was sitting on my bench outside my hut on the Northumberland coast, because I want to hear about the incredible results of the project, which, thanks to the work of the team, has meant that Roseate Terns do have a brighter future. So in this session, we're going to be starting off really hearing about how we've managed to improve the management of existing sites where Roseate Terns are currently breeding. We're then later on going to be talking about how we've been preparing sites for colonisation, and then later on the conference we'll get the wider European perspective. We'll hear more about some of the policy challenges, and hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow we'll have a better idea about what the strategy going forward should look like. Now the first speaker, if things go according to plan, is going to be Steve Newton, and he's going to be talking about Rockerbill, which is a site which I've been to, and it's talking about itself as the source of everything, as you'll hear. So Steve is Senior Conservation Officer at Birdwatch Ireland, and he's responsible for seabird research, monitoring and colony management, which includes coordinating the Rockerbill, Roseate Tern and Kilcool Little Tern projects, together with coordinating the input of the seabird monitoring programme, which is UK and Ireland based, and from other Birdwatch Ireland projects. He's also run the Dalkey Island Tern project, is involved with other teams responsible for the Baltray and Portray Little Tern projects, and the breeding tern team of the Dublin Bay Birds project. He's been chairman of the Irish Breeding Birds, Rare Breeding Birds team, he says, for too many years, and he's on the editorial panel of the Irish Birds Journal. And with that, I'm going to turn off my camera and hand over to Steve.
Good morning. Can people hear me? I hope.
We can, Steve.
Good, good. Right. The source of everything. A leading question, and it wasn't posed by me. I think it's one of Daniel's. So anyway, I'll try and make up a story to that theme. Really what I want to do here is explain a little bit about what we do and how things have evolved in terms of managing Roseate Terns on Rockerbill. I'll then go through a few of the sort of key results and long-term trends that we've seen in our Roseate Terns and other species out there. And then I'm going to pose a few questions and comparisons and try and open the debate about what we do on Rockerbill and whether it is any different to what Paul and Tony do on the other 2 key sites, and maybe what other people are doing further afield in the Atlantic. So literally that's what I'm going to try and do, and then there'll be an extended acknowledgements of all the people that have helped us get where we are today. Okay, so certainly on Rockerbill, I seem to have lost control, but I'll try and go back. Yeah, what do we do to manage these beautiful birds on this incredible island and set of islands, really, because Coca is very special as well, and Ladies Island is unique in a somewhat different way, but we'll hear about those stories later. Firstly, when we arrive out in Rockerbill sometime this year, a bit later than we hoped because of COVID, but normally we get out in April, the island is a forest of tree mallow. Now this species is probably native to the island to a certain degree, but it's really taken over. We have a sort of jungle, a forest about 1.5 meters high. the tree trunks themselves are about 5 centimeters, so there's a lot of sawing and hacking to clear space on the island for the terns. If we left it as it is, I don't think we'd have anywhere near the same number of terns. So literally we have a week or more of clearing vegetation, recycling it one way or another, or composting it, and making space for boxes and for the species that nest out in the open, the common terns and the Arctic terns. Boxes have become synonymous with roseate terns, and I hope people will be asking the question, why do we use them? Why do we need so many? And so on and so forth. We seem to work on a model that roseate terns in the Northeast Atlantic are pretty much on the edge of their subtropical range, and that the boost they get from being in boxes in terms of a bit of protection from the rather inclement weather we seem to be experiencing the last 10 or 20 years worth of summers, it gives them a little bit of a head start. We feel that roseate terns would normally nest under rocks, a little bit under vegetation, but the rocks are certainly on the low side on Rockabill, so boxes certainly give them a boost, and I'll be covering the box issue later. But anyway, on our little island of about a half a hectare, we try and get about 900 boxes out per year. So they all have to be got out of storage and got into place for the terns. What else do? We spend a lot of time chasing gulls, particularly great blackback gulls and to a lesser extent herring gulls. These guys would probably have a big thriving colony on the island if we didn't live on the island and spend a lot of our time chasing them off. So we have tried all sorts of things to move them. We have more or less stopped them breeding, but they do hang around, and they're intimately linked with the fishing industry, which is sort of thriving in the Irish Sea. So there's not much we can do to really get rid of them, although I would like to get more of them shifted for more of the season. Okay, then the season kicks off. Usually the first eggs appear somewhere between about the 18th and the 22nd of May, that sort of period. And then we enter this frenetic phase of about 2 months in which we're marking nests, counting eggs, bringing chicks, weighing and measuring chicks very regularly. A lot of time goes into ring reading the adults, and hence tells us the demography story that has led to the feeling that, yes, Rockabill is the source of everything in the Northeast Atlantic, that there's a very heavy dependence on the output of Rockabill for sustenance of the colonies at Ladies Island Lake, Coquet, and maybe to a lesser extent in France and Brittany. So what have we found from all this effort? We've managed to grow the roseate tern colony from 180 pairs in 1989 to its present level of about 1,600 pairs. As you can see, there have been 2 phases of growth, an early one with a plateau in the 1990s, and then a second rapid growth starting about 2005 up to 2015, and then we seem to have hit this plateau at about 1,600 pairs. But what is obviously far more noticeable is the decline in productivity of the colony as the numbers have grown. So we end up with this big debate of what unit do we want? Do we want healthy productivity, or do we want ever more roseate terns? So look, literally when the latest growth phase kicked off 2005, 2006, productivity, generally speaking, started going down. Classic density dependence, but that's it. And it's certainly something we'll try and talk about in our discussion sessions throughout the conference. I say we spend a lot of time recording the diet of the chicks. For Rockabill, we do this principally through a series of 3 all-day watches from 5 in the morning to 10 at night, literally sunrise through to sunset. We watch 15 nests, the same ones each year, and record all the fish coming in to those 15 nests. And this is literally what we find. There are big cycles of switches between the dominance of sand eels and clupeids. The clupeids are sprats and herring. We're not quite sure which. There's probably both involved, but more recent work has indicated that maybe we are seeing more herring, young herring, than sprats. But all we can say at the moment, we're in a phase dominated by sand eels. You can see the last couple of years where we've been between about 70 and 90% sand eel. So that's what the food is telling us. And then back to the question of why are boxes so important to roseate terns. Now, this looks a little bit of a mess, this slide, but we'll go in order 1, 2, 3, 4, which I hope are relatively logical. Clutch initiation, the birds nesting in boxes start about a week earlier than the open nesting birds. Okay, so they certainly get a head start there. That's graph number 1. If we look at graph number 2, we're looking at clutch initiation date. Sorry, the number of eggs laid against clutch initiation date. The boxes are usually laying bigger clutches, and that holds for most of the core laying period. It's only at the tail on the right-hand side of the graph do the two lines intersect and switch, but generally speaking, 99% of the activity has happened before that date, and literally most of the box pairs lay 2 eggs, and of the open nesting pairs, there's about an equal spread of 1 and 2 egg clutches. Then when we get to the proportion of eggs hatched, you know, another classic breeding success metric, box nesting pairs inevitably hatch about 90% of their eggs. For open nesting pairs, it's a little bit less, and there's a dramatic tail off at the end of the season there in graph number 3. And then we look at overall the proportion of fledglings, young at that fledge, consistently, except that very first point on the graph, really, where they're about the same, but generally speaking, our box nests are raising far more young than the open nesting pairs. So I'll say a little bit about this year, because last year we were on a high that we managed to get productivity steadily going up throughout most of the life project. Unfortunately, that's come to a grinding halt this year, and we had our worst ever productivity. We had a gorgeous May, hot sunny weather while we were setting up, birds were laying, everything was going great, and then the first crack in an egg, pipping egg, and the heavens opened and the gale started blowing, and they just continued all the way through the season. So very poor weather, and it ended up with very poor productivity. We're not certain whether there was a fish effect in that. I don't think there was. Fish supply looked pretty good. I'd say more sand eels than clupeids, but we're not sure. And this contrasts dramatically with the stories I think you're going to hear from Paul and Tony, that they had very great years at Coquet and Ladies Island Lake, respectively. Now we're going to start probing some of the key differences between our 3 key colonies. And certainly at Rockabill, you can see that only about 50% of our roseate terns use boxes. So we do still have a very significant number nesting in the open. And although we can sort of get about 95% occupancy of our nest boxes, find that there are certain parts of the colony, even if we put boxes out, the roseate terns don't take to them, that there are areas dominated by common terns, and for some reason or another, the roseate terns don't want to be there. So there's certainly a hope that we might be able to persuade roseate terns in the long term to use these areas, but I hope we'll discuss that in our Q&As and open chat sessions later on. and just a few, this is the closest thing I can get to an aerial. I suppose we should fly a drone around the place, but I don't like doing that. But anyway, from the top of our lighthouse, this is the view looking down towards our Roseate Tern colonies. And you can see that the density of nest boxes that we have in the various areas on the outer edge of the island where most of the Roseate Terns are. There's certainly a lot of enclosed habitat quite close to the buildings on the island. You can see there on the left-hand shot, the house in the foreground, and behind it is what we call a garden, the front garden, quite vegetated. This is an area, again, it's totally dominated by common terns, and the Roseate Terns are not interested. So even if we put 100 boxes in there, we might get 5 occupied or something like that. So it's really this outer bit of the colony that we aim to put a very high density of boxes. It's more so on the west side of the island than the east side of the island. The east side of the island is very much dominated by common terns and to a lesser extent the Arctics. Anyway, I'm showing you what it looks like. We have a network of 5 hides from which we do all our ring reading as part of the demographic work. And now I'm going to come to this stage where I sort of say, what, if anything, makes Rockabill different to the other 2 islands? So I've laid out a little table there of some of the sort of key differences and similarities. There seem to be more similarities than differences between the 3 sites. So certainly the similarities might explain a little bit about why Roseate Terns are there with the other species. But you know, what are the differences? And we'll pull those out at the end. Let's say Rockabill is very much smaller than the other 2 islands. It's also significantly further offshore. We tend to think Roseate Terns like feeding, well, certainly in our area, over deeper water. So that might give them a head start over the colonies in the south of Ireland and in the North Sea. All 3 colonies are about the same size in terms of the total number of pairs of tern, but bear in mind, Rockabill, we only have 3 species, whereas in Coquet and Ladies Island, they host significant colonies of sandwich terns. All sites have wardens. On Rockabill and Coquet, the wardens and researchers live on the island. At Ladies Island, it's a little more difficult, being a sort of inland site. The wardens are there throughout the day, virtually every day of the breeding season. And if some predator management needs to be done at night, staff will be on the island at night. But Tony and Paul will talk about their regimes in a little while. And as you can see, and it's stayed fairly consistent, Rockabill has held about an order of magnitude higher number of Roseate Terns compared to the other 2 colonies. So can we change that statistic? I don't know. And then looking at some of maybe the other more ecological factors, all the colonies have kittiwakes either nesting on the island or close by. Kittiwakes could be deemed a competitor for the same fish resource as the terns. They're both either dabblers or shallow divers. Kittiwakes perhaps scavenge behind fishing boats a lot more than the terns. Terns wouldn't be seen dead doing that, I don't think. But certainly there's a common factor with the kittiwakes. Other species that are required to bring prey fish to the surface for terns and kittiwakes to access are usually auks in our part of the North Atlantic. Puffins, razorbills, and guillemots, and there's certainly plenty of them breeding very close to all 3 colonies, and in the case of Coquet, the puffins are on the island itself. In terms of pests, I think everybody experiences odd problems with peregrines and maybe kestrels and other birds of prey, but fortunately for these 3 colonies, we haven't had massive problems with them. Gulls are perhaps the most significant issue on the bird predator front. I say we don't have any breeders. We have a lot of loafers hanging around that do tend to target eggs early on in the season when the birds are getting established, and later on they will certainly tuck in to fledglings and unplanted young on the perimeter of the colony at Rockerbill. Mammalian pests, fortunately, Rockerbill, we're, I think, sufficiently far offshore to be out of significant danger from colonization by rats or mink or even otters, whereas Coquet and Ladies Island have all experienced some problems in the case of Coquet, or more regular problems in Ladies Island, being an enclosed lagoon colony with a big population of various mustelids and rodents around. I've put down there people problems on Rockerbill, generally speaking, none. You know, we certainly will get some visitors, yachtsmen, kayakers, fishermen get a bit too close sometimes, but by and large, we don't have a people problem on the island. Coquet is very much different, with the threat from egg collectors and obviously a big tourism industry wanting to get close to puffins and the Roseate Terns, hopefully. Ladies Island is somewhere in between the two, with occasions where we have suspected egg collectors. Again, Tony will probably be covering that. And then the last row there of this table is, you know, is the scope to do a lot more for Roseate Terns. And I'd say on Rockerbill that we are getting close to the point where we've run out of space to do things, to squeeze more terns in. Coquet and Ladies Island obviously have slightly bigger acreages, but they also have a lot of other species occupying much of that space. So maybe they can do a little bit of innovative space creation for Roseate Terns, but it would be at the expense of other species. So summarizing that, what makes Rockerbill stick out a little bit? Its distance offshore, lack of mammal threat. One key thing I'm thinking more and more about is there something to do with the sandwich terns, because both Coquet and Ladies Island have these big populations of sandwich terns, which obviously roughly eat the same sort of species, possibly slightly larger ones. But I think there's a good bit of work to do there on diet and the impact or the interaction between the smaller terns, the common Arctic and roseate, and the sandwich terns. So there might be a little bit of work we should talk about there. I say Rockerbill, no history of human interference, really. They've been looked after by the lighthouse keepers for a long time, and certainly Birdwatch Island have worked hard at it for the last 30 odd years. Lack of space on Rockerbill, perhaps not so much on the other sites, but we might hear differently. And I say really what we find is lacking for the Irish Sea, for our side, is any understanding of what's going on with the prey fish, rats, the sand eels, the herring, and the gadids, which aren't that important for roseate terns, but are probably more important for the common terns. So there are some of the key things I think we should be thinking about going forward. And now, literally, I'm going to wind up fairly rapidly, and I'm going to acknowledge some of my colleagues and certainly co-workers in this project. There have been a lot of people who have put a lot of time and effort into helping us out, both actually physically on site and sort of intellectually in running the project and what we're trying to do. I have to mention the late Oscar Mern, who's been a great friend of mine for many years and has always been very keen and very hardworking on Rockerbill, and made sure that funding has been available when we haven't had the European money. Norman Ratcliffe is still involved, even from his southward biased research these days, and has been heavily involved in the demographic work that we've undertaken. David Cabot is another character who certainly started off the demographic work a long way back, bringing roseate terns on Rockerbill regularly, and had a great interest in the other site, which is used by roseates close by on Dorky Island. And we've also enjoyed the stimulation and chatting and meeting up at conferences with our North American colleagues, particularly Ian Nisbet, Jeff Spendelow, and Helen Hayes. I've had great relationships with them, always at a distance, but we've enjoyed their thoughts. Now here I think sort of the medalists for Rockabill, some of the key people over the years who wardened the site for more than 1 year. I think we should sort of applaud them. What one guy stands out, he was there at the beginning, Liam Ryan. Whoops, we've hopped a bit. He's a farmer down in Wexford, not far from Tony in Ladies Island Lake, but he still has an interest in the birds, and he was there at the very beginning. We've had 5 wardens who spent 3 years out there. We thank them, Rick, Olivia, Laura, Anya, and Brian Burke. Brian, I hope, is tuned in and will be involved in the discussion later. And we've had 3 people that have done a couple of years. So that sort of continuity we get from multiple years has always been very beneficial for the project. Other important people we have to mention are National Parks and Wildlife, Kieran O'Keefe and David Tierney, for ensuring we have had funding and match funding over the years, and I hope they enjoy the times they do get out onto the island. That's them in the top left. We've had some support from political folk over the years, and Jim Wells up in the north, a well-known character, a real peregrine man, if anything, but he loves Rockabill and Lambay and their seabirds, and has always visited us regularly, given us a lot of support. More recently, we've had Princess Takamoto of Japan, Honorary BirdLife President, has come to visit us on her terns, and although she came wanting to see puffins, I think she did fall in love with the terns while she was out there. And obviously, we have to thank the European Union for funding from Life, Nature and Interreg over the course of this project. It's made a massive difference. And I have to acknowledge Irish Lights for tolerating our presence on the island and letting us get on with the bird work in the summer months, and to the local community in Skerries for respecting the terns and generally keeping away and letting us get on with it, but being interested in what happens. And finally, I have to acknowledge the more recent colleagues, Daniel, Chantal, and Paul, particularly for their company, enthusiasm, administrative support, and the fun we've had traveling about the Roseate Tern colonies in the North Atlantic over the last 5 years. Great fun, enjoyed every minute of it, except maybe the financial spreadsheet. And that's enough from me, I think, and I hope we get lots of questions and good chat.
Steve, that was absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much. And I think it's just a great reminder just how many people have actually been involved to help make it successful. So because you've been really consistent with time slot, we've actually got a decent slug of time for questions. And for those of you who might have arrived a bit late, we're using the Q&A function. And I'm actually going to go to the Q&A function and work through the list. Some of you posted multiple questions. I'll probably rotate around people who have actually been asking the questions. So, Steve, are you happy for me just to fire away, and we'll just try and get through as many as possible in the next quarter of an hour?
I'll try, and I hope others can chip in a bit if need be. If Paul and Tony might be available to unmute themselves at the appropriate moments.
Yeah, actually there are some very Rockabill specific questions, but also some which relate to other issues which potentially could bring in others. So the first one, actually, Norman Ratcliffe, who you've mentioned, obviously been involved in the project. He's asked, on Rockabill, you're controlling tree mallow, but other colonies are trying to establish it, for example, on the Skerries. Would you now discourage this?
Well, I think we did dabble with that introducing it on Skerries, and it never really took off. Yeah, yes, I think I would, because it just takes up so much space. And although the edge of any tree mallow forest is useful for the terns, those birds that want to nest out in the open away from the boxes, but I think we made the decision to go for boxes rather than tree mallow a long time ago. And it does seem to be the model that has worked on Coquet particularly. So I don't think we should be encouraging tree mallow. If it wants to be there and it's there at low density, it will provide a bit of cover for the birds. But But yeah, I agree, you know, and I mean, in a way with COVID, I was thinking maybe this would be the year when we aren't allowed out to the island, and it would be very interesting to see, you know, if we couldn't get out, couldn't clear the mallow, couldn't get the boxes out, how would the birds respond to that? I thought it would be a great experiment, but I'd love to see the answer, but I wouldn't really want to experience it. And in a way, I'm glad we did get out to do the work. But yeah, yes, I think the amount of time and effort we have to get rid of it just, I wouldn't be encouraging it. Yeah, I would go for boxes and maybe some little patches of vegetation if people think.
We've had a comment coming in actually from Viv Booth saying that she doesn't think the Scots are trying to introduce tree mallow anymore. But anyway, well, that's for maybe a wider discussion. Actually, I'm going to stick with Viv, and she's got a question, but I'm going to sneak in an additional one actually, because my question, which then segues into Viv's, is where did you get the inspiration to use boxes in the first place? And then Viv's question is, do the same individuals consistently nest in and out of the boxes? And then also anything about whether the quality of the adults varies according to the boxes. So yeah, so the history of it, and then also is there sort of fidelity in terms of whether they nest in or outside?
Right. Okay. The history, I'm not quite sure. I think there'd be a little bit of debate across the Atlantic as to who invented the Roseate Tern box, and I'm not quite sure. I just tend to think it sort of simultaneously and it evolved on both sides of the Atlantic, and we sort of took it up in different ways. Certainly some of the North American colonies, Great Gull Island, there's a lot more rocky habitat where the roseate terns can nest in more natural conditions. We certainly lack that, so that's why we went big time, I think, down the box route. And at one point I said it was just sheer numbers. We were just trying to get things out and spread them out fairly evenly across the island. Then we were finding we were getting very low occupancy in certain areas, but in other areas, the more we put in, the more birds would use them. And I think each colony has taken its own little regime there, but it's good to sort of pause and reflect a little bit. But I don't think we should take direct credit, certainly not in Birdwatch and RSPB. I don't know. I think the North Americans might say it was really their idea. So, you know.
And in terms of whether the birds consistently nest in or outside of the boxes?
Well, our best source of data there would be what we call our study areas on Rockabill, which are smallish plots. They have little boundary walls to a certain extent. And when we look at them now, they have fairly low density of boxes. But the one thing is we keep the boxes in exactly the same place year on year. So it's literally physically the same box in the same place every year. And in the years we have monitored it very closely, yes, the same pairs come back to the same box. If by accident we put a box 2 or 3 foot to one side or another where it usually is, we've once found, I think, that a pair that nested in that box for several years, we put it in the wrong place by accident. It was overlooked for the critical laying period. That pair nested on the open, on the actual bit of ground that the box would.
All right, so incredibly faithful.
So they're incredibly faithful to the bit. But, you know, birds die and pairs change, and I think there's a little more flux in it than we think. But I am trying to get that bit of work. It sort of lapsed a little bit in the last few years of looking at who is in exactly which box. Sometimes we are under time pressure to get things out, and they don't quite go out exactly as were the previous year. But generally speaking, yes, they are consistent. The boxes are obviously occupied very early, and it does look, when you saw all the nest of 4 graphs, that it is high quality, probably experienced, probably early arriving birds that do occupy in the preferred areas. So
do you think there is a relationship in terms of the quality of the adults, which either find the best boxes, or indeed, you know, the quality of the birds which fledge? I mean, have you managed to determine that?
Well, longitudinally, looking at succession through the generations, we're not quite sure. That's certainly a piece of work that we you know, could desperately do with looking at is, you know, this is the lifetime reproductive success of pairs, and how their offspring do they inherit those same qualities of early arrival, adopting boxes. So it's when we get recruits, where have they come from? Where do they go? Generally speaking, they shuffle around, and I tend to think it's probably got a little more to do with the sort of mate selection business than the real estate trying to get back into mum and dad's house or next door to it. Yeah, it all seems to shuffle around the island a little bit, but we have not analysed that data set at all.
Well, there's always good to have further research. I've got a sort of a vexed conservation conundrum type of question, which I think would equally be applied at Coquet. But don't know if you want to answer this one, Steve. This has come in from Alexander Fink. How is chasing deterring gulls possible at all, taking into account the gull's conservation status? She puts in back, I think they're also threatened species. Well, certainly in case, in the UK context, species like herring gull, lesser blackback gulls, they are, of course, red listed. And then it says, she asked, is it because they're less threatened than roseate? So your perspective on what one does with other threatened species if they're causing disturbance challenges?
Well, that's for those above me who issue the licenses and what we can do. I say we can't at the moment lethally control the gulls, so we do get licenses to move them on, to scare them, to try and keep them. I think, yes, there has to be a hierarchy. The terns are Annex 1 species, the gulls are not. Yes, locally in Britain and Ireland and maybe elsewhere in Europe, they can be red listed. I think we are revising our conservation concern list in Ireland at this very moment, and it looks like herring gull will drop down. There's been a significant recovery in the population in the last 10, 20 years, so they will drop down to the amber list. But let's say that throughout all of this, the great blackbacks, which perhaps cause us the most grief, they have been green listed, but we aren't lethally controlling them. We are allowed to, under license, remove nests if they do nest, but literally we only get 1 or 2 in some years. There are massive gull colonies all around us on the other islands in our part of the Irish Sea. So there's a thriving population. It's just trying to keep them away from Rockville for a couple of months.
I see Tony Murray's turned his video on. Is that because you wanted to come in at this point? Those of you who don't know, Tony's from the National Parks and Wildlife Service in Ireland.
Yeah, Martin, I think I just turned on, and then Steve kind of answered the kind of the hierarchy. At Ladies Island, our gull control is, when we get questioned on it as well, I mean, the SPA is designated for the 4 species of tern, and our objective is to keep those species in favourable conservation status. The removal of a small cohort of black-headed gull nests or black-headed gulls or larger gulls is not going to affect the conservation of non-qualifying interest species on the site, but failure to do so may have consequences in that respect. So just to kind of add that, but Steve had sort of steered that way anyway.
That's great. Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'm going to try and do some quick fire ones. So the first one I'm going to ask, is there competition for boxes from common terns in the front garden?
No, the common terns do not use boxes, full stop. We've had odd occasions, not on Rockabill, but on Dorky Island, where Arctic terns have used a box, but we've never had a common tern using a box.
Okay. Actually, this one maybe not quite a rapid fire, but it's coming from David Tierney. You showed a nice graph of roseate tern numbers and productivity, which may indicate a density-dependent influence. Have you explored this further by incorporating the abundance and productivity trajectories of the common terns on Rockabill?
Explored.
I don't think you can look at it in the Q&A.
Well, that's a different talk. We'll have to have a common term conference on Saturday, maybe.
That's a nice way of dealing with that one.
But productivity of common terns on Rockabill has been appalling for a long time. Yet the population has certainly plateaued earlier and has stayed stable or decreased slightly. But it generally is around 1,800, 2,000 pairs. We have a few more than we do roseates, but productivity is very poor. But they are still there. And, occasionally, last year we had quite a good season, and I'm sure that'll keep the population at its present level. So, you know, I'm not too worried. It's the Arctic terns I want to do a bit more for.
Yeah.
We used to have hundreds, and now we're down to tens, and most of it is this gull issue that we need to tackle, and that's been, and you know, if what the gulls have kind of destroyed our Arctic tern colony, they're beginning to have a significant impact on the kittiwakes and perhaps on common terns and maybe rosy terns. So that's our focus really is to try and.
I did have a question actually relating to the kittiwake. Oh, here it is. This is from Matt Murphy. Are your kittiwakes increasing on Rockabill, and do you think mackerel might bring bait fish up to the surface for kittiwakes and terns?
Kittiwakes are not increasing on Rockabill. They have increased over the sort of 20 or 30 years, from maybe about 100-ish pairs to where we are now, somewhere 175, occasionally 200 pairs. But again, most of them are on the bill on the northern second island, and they're hammered by the gulls. What we've seen recently is a lot of them have moved over onto the rock now, and so they're protected by higher density of common and roseate terns and people, us, on that island. So most of the population has moved over, but there'll be a limited space. But no, it's a very small colony, and there isn't a massive amount of room, cliff room, for them to increase significantly. But you know, we have thousands of them not far away on Lambay Island. And mackerel, yes, certainly would be another species. I mentioned cetaceans and the diving orcs and whatever, but yes, we don't really know what goes underwater. We certainly do get poor years for mackerel. So, you know, we tend to think the orcs are probably the most important thing driving the sort of feeding frenzies of terns. But our tracking work, if people look up the paper where we, you know, boat visually track the rosy terns, a lot of the time they weren't interested in the big feeding frenzies attached to diving species, and they were going off on their own into deeper water, much further afield for their fish. So, you know, the fish is where we need to be working really.
Yeah.
We've done the birds almost.
Yeah, no, just diet. Yeah. Actually, while you've been chatting, I'm going to go back to boxes because Adrian Del Nevo, sorry, I don't know your surname, says that boxes were first used in the US, and then we copied the idea. This was published by Adrian and Mark Avery, my predecessor, in the late 1980s, and we then encouraged Oscar to do this on Rockabill. So that's
yeah, I thought it was American. So
yeah, very good. And then another question on boxes again. Doug Radford asks: are all 900 boxes occupied?
Not quite, but I mean, I could put unlimited data, but I say we have about 90 to 95% occupied, and I say there are years when it's gone down to about 60%, but that's when we've put a more even distribution around the island. I say we know the key areas that roseate terns love, and the more boxes we pack into that area, the more birds we get nesting. So we now don't bother putting boxes out where it's hit or miss whether a pair will use it. So yes, most of them are used. We might still do another experiment on one of these unpopular areas by, you know, packing in a lot of boxes. Might reduce the density of common terns a little bit and maybe encourage a new cohort of roseates to occupy that space. But yeah, all good ideas.
If I'm going to try and get through these last questions. If you could be really succinct, we've got about 7 others to do, so as short answer as possible, if Steve. So the first one is, I know you presented some data on this. Is the Rockabill colony still growing? Asks Alexandra, I think again. And what about recruitment of birds' flesh from Rockabill? Isn't known where they go. I think we'll get onto that. But is the Rockabill colony still growing?
No, it stopped growing. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. And the poor productivity, I think, is going to, you know, keep that. It'll stay much as it is for a few years, and you know we're expecting a bit of a hit in 3 years' time because of the poor productivity this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's stable now, I think.
Interestingly, one's come in on boxes again from Edward Drost. How long did it take for the birds to start using the boxes when they were first introduced? Do you know?
I think it was pretty immediate. A box in the right place is appealing, and I say that the habitat the terns would like with a bit of cover, but you can't provide that much habitat on the edge of the tree mallow, and we have a small area of sort of bouldery rock where birds can nest underneath the boulders and whatever. So I think it was pretty much straight away, and that's why you saw that sustained growth from 180 pairs up to about 500.
Yeah.
More boxes we put out, the bigger the colony got.
And Richard Caldo asks whether you've got any more information on the likely mechanism for the apparent density-dependent decline in productivity. You got any sort of?
Well, I want to look. I should, and maybe the next conference we have, I'll overlay those trends with the diet. That's what I'd quite like to see, whether or not there is a link, correlation, or otherwise between. Is it clupeids or sand eels that are better for roseate terns? We tend to think the clupeids have been perhaps more important in Rockabill than the sand eels. Our feeling from Rockabill is that the other colonies, particularly in the North Sea and maybe South Coast with Tony, that sand eels are more important for roseate terns than the other species. For us, it tends to be clupeids, although I say we've had a couple of years of high utilization of sand eels, but it's all a work in progress, and I do think we need more focus on the fish.
I'm going to ask the last question. There are a few, unfortunately, I won't be able to get to, but we'll no doubt email them to you, Steve, and you'll be able to maybe address them directly. But the last one really is from Alice Skill, which was really about ringing and disturbance. And the question is, do you feel ringing or colour ringing creates significant disturbance in a dense seabird colony? How often do you ring? And do you try and ring a certain percentage of the chicks? Do you do adult roseate terns? And why not if you've have not done so? So it's really about that conundrum about how you manage the disturbance effects of ringing.
We don't think there's a disturbance effect. We think the more you do, the more tolerant the birds become, and the better the population does. That we're in ringing every day. We certainly never have a stand back. We always go in through our study areas, which is about 20% or so of the population. Those nests would be visited once or twice a day to weigh and measure them, ring a jig, and whatever. There is a lot of apparent research disturbance, but it's not disturbance. I say the more we just benignly disturb them through our work, the more tolerant they become of it. There's no effect there for us at all.
Okay. Well, look, great. Steve, thanks so much, not just for your talk and obviously for dealing with the rapid round of questions we've just had, but also just everything you and the team have been doing on Rockabill. I mean, it's just fantastic. I mean, I went about 10 years ago and got bombarded by terns. It's just an amazing place. Just should say I've been reminded that all unanswered questions will be on the website. And what I didn't realise actually just now, I wondered why the questions were moving up and down. It was because actually people are voting on which questions they want to ask. So I think I managed to deal with most of the ones near the top. So for now, Steve, a massive thank you, and you can sit back and relax. We're now going to move on to the last talk in the session. And this one is from going back to Ireland again, and this is Tony Murray. This is another pre-record, and so I hope the quality is okay. Again, if it isn't, it'll be available on the website. And Tony, who's from the National Park and Wildlife Service, you saw him earlier. He's going to be talking about Ladies Island Lake. And he's been working for the Irish National Parks and Wildlife Service for over 20 years. Currently the Conservation Ranger for South Wexford. Previously worked with Birdwatch Ireland and the RSPB, including since as the Tern Warden at Dalkey Islands and Innisfrwg. And one of the several SPAs he manages is Ladies Island Lake in Wexford. So as before, Tony's going to speak for about the presentation is going to be about 15 minutes or so. And then after that, the sort of live Tony will appear and we'll have another 15-minute Q&A. Over to the presentation.
Hello, I just got a couple of minutes notice there to say that I'm going to be doing this live instead. So I think I have control, at least I hope I do. You'll have to bear with me. I wasn't anticipating going live, but sure, we shall give it a go.
Do you have the controls of the screen, Tony?
I don't appear to do so at the moment, I'm afraid. Do I need to do something to obtain control?
I'm just keeping an eye on the chat bar and to see if I get a little guidance. I think the guy's trying to make sure that what you present is as nice as possible, really.
Okay, so, I think I might have
okay,
got
great.
control there.
I'll shut up and go away then, Tony.
Okay, I'll do my best here. Bear with me. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be talking to you about the Ladies Island Lake Coastal Lagoon site in County Wexford. A bit of history first. Daniel asked me to give a little bit of history up to the colony first. This is an aerial photograph from the early 70s by Oscar Mearn. You can see the wooded stripe at the top of the photograph is the Raven Nature Reserve, the Wexford Wildfowl Reserve just to the left-hand side of that woodland. And in the middle of Wexford Harbour, you can see a dark sandbar, which is called Tern Island. This was the location where the large Wexford Roseate Tern colony was located. In the 1960s, there were up to 2,000 pairs of Roseate Tern on this island here in the middle of Wexford Harbour, along with all the other Irish species as well. Common Arctic sandwich, little and black-headed gulls as well. This island suffered significant erosion in the late 70s, and in 1976 and in 1977 got washed away completely. The Terns then, the following year, 1978, relocated to Ladies Island, which is you can see in the inset photograph here, literally the very southeast corner of Ireland, just about 5 or 6 kilometres south of Wexford Harbour. So not a huge distance off to the south, but the birds relocated here in the late 70s. Well, a cohort of them did. The Ladies Island didn't, in 1978, obtain the numbers that that were on Tern Island. But you can see from this graph, within 6 years, the colony at Ladies Island Lake had effectively been completely wiped out. There was massive issues that still persist with water level control, terrestrial and aerial predation issues, and other factors as well. So by 1983, Ladies Island only accommodated a few. Sorry, I'm getting messages here on the screen. Okay. By 1983, the colony was virtually wiped out, and it was deemed at that time largely unmanageable. And an effort was made to shift the colony to a group of offshore islands called the Kirrach Islands, about 20 kilometres to the west. It had a history of common and Arctic terns, and a significant effort was put in to de-gull the island, to locate boxes on the island, to use decoys, tern decoys on the island, and to use calls as well. So that program persisted for a few years. However, the terns didn't take to it, decided they did want to stay at Ladies Island. And this is an aerial photograph of Ladies Island I took from a Cessna a couple of years ago. You can see the lagoon is, roughly speaking, around about maybe a little bit less than 4 kilometres in length, a little bit less than 2 kilometres in width at the southern end, narrower at the northern end. There are 2 main islands, which you can just about see middle centre. They are the 2 main ternary islands. Also, if you notice, the lagoon, obviously being a lagoon, is separated from the sea by a very narrow shingle bar, about at its narrowest, maybe 250 meters in width. And if you notice towards the right-hand side of the photograph, there is a large sort of inlet, which is an unvegetated area. This is the area that in spring we use to control the water levels, or at least to attempt to control the water levels within the lake. So around about February, depending on winter levels, depending on weather and various other factors, we engage the services of a contractor to cut a channel from the lagoon out to the sea. He generally cuts this channel just literally the width of the bucket. Depending on water levels, wind direction, tides, and other factors, this flow of water, this cut as we call it, can vary from a relatively gentle flow onto a massive torrent that can, looking at this torrent of water going out, you can see rocks twice the size of basketballs rolling out. It is uncontrollable, and sometimes leaves us in a scenario with this situation. This is the northern island called Scarrigean. You can see here there is now no water between the island and the mainland. And if you look close enough on the right-hand side of the photograph, you can look what appear to be footprints as well. So the lack of water persists us with an issue in terms of access for ourselves, but also more importantly, biosecurity, our biggest factor from Ladies Island. So what we're trying to get from is on top left, which photograph taken from the southern end of Inish looking north. This is the main part of the Tern colony. So in March, just before we drop the water levels, you can see the island is flooded. The right-hand side photograph was taken in exactly the same spot in July of the same year. You can see the tree, just the Monterey pine tree, the one tree that's on the island, just as a point of reference. So in the top left-hand photograph in March, the area that the Roseate use and a significant cohort of the common and Arctics is submerged. And therefore, we need to try and address that situation. But of course, Paul alluded to the issues with vegetation control. This is, without this flooding in winter, this would create us with a major rank, dense vegetation control issue. So the submergence of the site in winter is very important for the management of the site. Okay, so our season starts in kind of February kind of time. We don't have the luxury of being an offshore island. From the photographs, you can see the two Tern Islands within the lagoon. So in February, if you just notice in the middle of the photograph there, the bait station, our rat bait stations, the first part of our main part of our work starts before the cut of the water, when we do our first round of rodenticide baiting. The island is privately owned. It's shot in winter for wildfowl, and wildfowlers do put out potatoes, grain, and other foodstuffs to attract widgeon and other wildfowl in. But this obviously facilitates the rats from overwintering. So our key objective at the start of the year is, before the cut, when the animals are most concentrated on the island, is to do the first round of rodenticide baiting to try and interrupt the rats season, to keep them at lower numbers, if not get rid of them, until they recolonize later in the year. I don't know if this video will play. Just please bear with me. I'm not sure if that video played. It did in the recorded version. This is a video from 2018 of pine marten picked up on trail camera. In 2018, largely down to the fact that, if you recall, that was one of the incredibly hot summers, and We had problems with low water levels that year, and we got 2 new visitors to Inish in the shape of this pine marten. And while we were trying to shoot the pine marten, we managed to stumble across a hedgehog. When we managed to shoot, I should say, under license, this pine marten, we were able to establish that it was a male, and from dental structure, probably a very young male, therefore not territorial, and therefore we believe potentially was in resident. As pine martens are known in Ireland anyway, to cache, while we found 5 dead roseates at the entrances to boxes, the exact number we're not sure, because we have concerns over the fact that this animal may have been caching terns at an unknown location on the island as well. This is not a great quality photograph, also from 2018. This photograph was taken, I don't know if the times are displayed on the photograph, but this photograph was taken at 1:40 and I think 40 seconds in the morning, and it captured an image of an American mink coming at full tilt towards the colony. The next frame in the photograph was at 2 seconds later, which showed the animal 180 degrees, done in a 180-degree turn. The camera just obviously made the animal turn. We tried, and in previous years, we have tried trapping of mustelids, and we have sought assistance from gamekeepers. Apparently, whatever chance you have of trapping a mustelid in the winter, the likelihood of trapping an animal in the summer is significantly reduced, irrespective of the age or whether it's a territorial male or territorial female. They become very much more wary in summer, and much harder to tackle. Again, luckily, we believe this animal was unlike the marten. We believe this animal was commuting, and luckily we were able to shoot this animal by its third evening. And this photograph is actually from this year. These are we see otters all the time at Ladies Island. This was a particular female and her 2 cubs. These 3 animals are actually still together. Seen them recently, still together and happy out. We don't think they're a problem. We've seen otters land on the island with a fish to come up on dry land and lie back and consume it, and the terns don't seem to even mob them. So therefore we think these are not a problem. But again, things that happen in the dark of night, we're sometimes not 100% certain. These are some of the images we're presented with when we go out. Marks to the back of the crown. Here's a roseate with a major wound on the underwing flank area. And this is a scenario that we were presented with. I think this one was from 2015. 1 roseate on the bottom. I think 16 juvie roseates just above it, and a cohort of common and arctics above that. This is actually a single night impact from 2018 from the mink I just showed a photograph of on the other side there. If you look at the left-hand side of the photograph there, in this particular night, we found 8 dead roseates, 27 dead juvenile fledgling roseates, and I think 70, 80 common and arctic terns as well. So this is just a one night. Again, we were very fortunate that we managed, I say, within a fairly short period of time of identifying that this animal was commuting to the island. We were able to shoot that animal within a couple of nights, which was a very welcome relief. So just to getting back in then onto one of the things that was on the pre-record, just in terms of wardening, our wardens are non-residential. They go out to the island as regularly as is possible when weather conditions allow it, and would be in residence until most evenings. We now on foot, we always used various fencing, including some electrified fencing, to deal with terrestrial predation, but on foot of the 2018 problems with the American mink and the marten, we were steered towards this type of fencing, which the Irish Curlew project were using, a meshed electric fence, which we erected in 2018 after the mustard hits, and which we used in 2019 and this year. Seems to work very well, and there doesn't seem to be any problems with tern chicks. We see them coming through it. We see them pulse as they can occasionally get hit on it. So it seems to work well on it. But just at this point, just acknowledge the amount of effort that goes in. I mean, our data collection probably isn't as extensive as would be on the Coquet or Rockabill, by virtue of the fact that our focus really is on just general welfare of the colony, seeing how things are going, seeing if there's any reactive measures that need to be taken, seeing if there are any other measures that need to be in place, just to try and keep our finger on the pulse and just to try to see how things are going. We have done in the past some provisioning rate data, food studies as well, but most of our work tends to be focused on biosecurity. I won't get too much into aerial predation because we get every kind of it. Sometimes we get these guys over summer with us, that they seem to land at boxes and stick their feet in. This wire device was developed by the wardens one of the years, which just keeps the bird's foot. The roseate tends to always be at the opposite end of the box, so when the owl lands, just this extra purchase seems to keep the problem at bay. And we believe these guys just literally come in first thing early in the morning. Not a problem, luckily, we have every year, but a problem that can manifest itself. Again, peregrine was mentioned. Steve mentioned it briefly and Paul briefly, but it's a regular occurrence for us. We have an eyrie not too far away, and there's nothing we can really do in terms of aerial predation, with the exception of gulls. As I alluded to during Steve's talk, we do active gull control. We do remove some nests that are proximal to the roseates, and we do have some control on some of the larger gulls when is necessary as well. The frustrating part of the peregrine situation seems to be the disproportionate hit on the roseates. Just by proportion of numbers, you would think that if you find roseates, dead roseates, you should find a higher proportion of the other more abundant tern species, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be the case. And we have a theory perhaps that the slight delay in the roseates exiting the box means that the peregrine, upon its decision to strike, the sandwich terns are 2-3 times the height. So it seems to be a slight problem in that respect. However, despite all the problems that we have in terms of gulls, again, Paul mentioned gulls on Coquet, but despite all the various terrestrial and aerial situations, we have in and around 6,000 pairs of breeding bird now on the island. Our black-headed gull numbers have been steadily increasing. There does appear to be some conflict with black-headed gull, and probably more so with common and Arctic terns, but their numbers are doing pretty well. Sandwich tern numbers again steadily increased from the 1983 wipeout. Numbers a little bit more up and down, as is typical enough with sandwich tern, but from about kind of 15 years ago, a fairly steady increase to around about the kind of 1,700 mark. This year we got a dip to just over 1,200. We're not sure why, but we're hoping that graph follows the up and down trend, and we get a nice bounce back next year. Common and Arctics, again, a pretty steady increase on both species. This is for both species graphed collectively. If we were to graph them separately, you would probably see the common tern graph would replicate this, whereas the Arctic tern would show a slightly more decrease. one thing that this graph does show, by the time that a census was managed to be carried out in 2001, you can see there was virtually nothing. In 2001, the foot and mouth year, there was no wardening. So by the time the census was done, there was very little to actually census. So it just illustrates the value of the presence and wardening and keeping your finger on the pulse. Here's our rosies. Things have been going pretty good, as you can see. A few dips there in the 90s, up and down, but a fairly steady increase from 2001 onwards. The little dip in 2019 from 225 down to 195 may have something to do with a bit to do with productivity a couple of years previous. But it's what we attribute to the mustard hits of that year. But we got a spectacular bounce this year from 195 up to 273, 273 I think it is. And in tandem with our highest number ever, looks like our productivity this year is going to be at 1.5, which is pretty impressive. I think 1.3 something is our previous best, and that was when we had a smaller colony too. But we're looking at a chick and a half per pair this year getting off, which is about as good as I think we can ever strive for. So thank you very much. I think I might have done that. I didn't check my start time. I think I might have done that a bit quick and forgotten some important points, but there we go. Thank you very much.
Tony, I think you did a fantastic job given the 2-minute notice that you were given to do it live. So a massive thank you for that. And actually the quality of the presentation was actually really quite high caliber. So thank you very much for that, Tony. Don't forget, we've probably got about 6 minutes for questions. I haven't got a huge number coming in now. I've just got the Doug Rufford's making a comment that he's trapped mink in the summer, but I also the question I wanted to ask really came from Viv Booth, was would the owners let you install anti-predator fencing or at least permanent posts for annually deployed fencing?
Yes. The problem with permanent fencing is the fact that the permanent fence would be underwater during the winter, would clog with vegetation and cause various issues in that respect. We have looked at fencing in terms of that's something that's similar to be used for flood relief, whereas it's something you could maybe drop in, take out as required to avoid. But permanent fencing is a problem. Winter storms, the island does get absolutely hammered in the winter, we're geographically where we are, but the submergence and the clogging of the vegetation, as I say, 6,000 pairs of birds produce an awful lot of fecal matter, and by the time the birds leave, there's still 2 or 3 months of growing that goes on, and it's almost impenetrable at that point. So permanent fencing would be an issue. I'm not on the first point, Martin. I think that mustard trapping is possible in the summer, but the sight, the sounds, the smells, the movement, the amount of discarded fish, unhatched eggs, trying to trap, trying to encourage mustard into a trap on Ladies Island in midsummer is a bit like bringing someone to a 5-star restaurant and asking them to have porridge. We did use fen traps for the pine marten, which we had traced with a dead rabbit. That video of the pine marten was him inspecting the trap area, but at no stage did he show any inclination to actually go in, just the curiosity to check it out.
Great. I've got another question coming in from David Tierney. It's all about weather, really. In earlier talk, Steve attributed poor weather to the relatively low breeding productivity on Rockerbill this year. What was the weather like in southeast of Ireland, in Wexford?
Not that drastically dissimilar. We had a great April, May, into June, July and August, not so good. But it didn't get to a point where it seemed to affect the fishing, the terns coming in with fish. I don't know if our temperatures were better than Rockville nighttime temperatures, but it certainly, our weather wasn't drastically dissimilar, but it certainly didn't hit us or impact us in any way, the shape. Whereas, as I mentioned at the end there, we're looking at a chick and a half out per pair, which is not far off the mean clutch.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
And the incredible productivity that you've had, Viv asks again, despite all those predators, is that just because of the extraordinary wardening effort you're putting in?
Yes, I would say, no. As I mentioned, the foot and mount year, there was nothing by the time it came to census. Yes, I mean, we don't do any anywhere near as intensive wardening of the common and Arctic terns. Our focus really is the roseates and the small area they occupy. The common and Arctics are far more spread around the island, but they do benefit from the predator control that we do use. But they are far more vulnerable to aerial predation and are far more greatly impacted from particularly large gull raids. The large gull raids are just unrelenting, and Arctic terns tend to be the ones that are most on the periphery, and they seem to be the ones that are great, have the greatest impact from that. But yes, I mean, the wardening, it's really down to the being on site, maintaining a presence, and really keeping a finger on what's going on.
And Claire Mumford, and this is the last question that I've got, more coming in. So what about relationships with local communities? Do you get any kickback from the local communities, or bad press coverage regarding the mammal control measures you're putting in place?
No, not really. I say the island is owned privately by a gentleman involved in wildfowling, and there's a good tradition of wildfowling within the lake during the winter. The local gun club themselves do mink trapping in the winter, which is no doubt has benefits for us too, for locally caught mink. There's no issue. There's no issue with any of that aspect of it. Some of the aerial predators that we control also tend to eat nesting mallard and godwall on the island, and our locals gun club people would be supportive of that too. But yeah, no, there seems to be no issue. There's a very pro perception to the project locally, and yeah, people enjoy it brings in people to see the terns and utilize the area in summer. So yeah.
Brilliant. And just because I think everyone's been asked this question, and David Kinchin-Smith is also asking you, do you have a rough idea of the proportion of the roseate colony nesting in boxes? And how many boxes do you have out? I'm not quite sure if you said that in the talk or not.
No, I didn't. We've about, in and around, we replace a certain percentage every year, but we've roughly speaking around about 400 out now as numbers have increased. So we had 273 this year. 95% of those would be in boxes, but we have far more boxes out than we need. But we have increased the amount of boxes in the last number of years just by virtue of the increase in number of pairs.
I'm just going to cover these last two. One's a point and one's a question. Norm Ratcliffe kindly is just offer the point that in the Outer Hebrides mink eradication project, they didn't use bait and buried cage traps. Mink just liked investigated cavities. They use mink scent lures and some traps that tend to increase the catch rates, and potentially that's worth considering, Norman suggests there. There's a question come in around, in order for us to have lunch, this might be our last one actually, do you tend to have more botulism events than other colonies, as terns will often feed in fresh water where the bacteria grow?
No, we don't. The lagoon is varies from, depending on the aftermath of the lowering of the water level, varies from brackish to hypersaline. There are flounder and stickleback in the lake, but none of the terns, with the exception of common tern, fish in the lake.
I'm just checking my timings. I'm going to be a bit bold and try and get through a couple of them quickly. So, Toby Wilson was asking around visitor disturbance, whether that's an issue, and what comms you use to deter people from approaching or visiting the island.
No visitors are allowed on the island during the summer for a couple of reasons. One, from a disturbance point of view, but the landowner also wishes to be indemnified against the project. So we entertain no visitors except the wardens and people related to the project, ringing and that kind of thing. That is enforced with extensive signage around the lake and by the virtual presence of the wardens pretty much any time the weather allows it, they're on the island. We did think we may have had an egg hit in 2019. There was eggs missing and a bowed fence that the wardens hadn't flattened by standing over. So things can happen late in the evening or very early in the morning. But in general, because of the significance of the project, if a boat or kayakers or canoeists or anything like that are on the lake, I will invariably get a phone call from somebody within a relatively short period of time.
And you said, I think you're 15 miles away, so you need a very powerful telescope to do a Paul Morrison and keep an eye on your colony from your comfort of your own home. So I suppose you have to get out there every day, don't you?
Yes, I'm not overlooking it like Paul is on the Coquet, but yeah, I'm not too far away. And as I say, the daily wardening of the site, they would be out there pretty much as soon as the weather permits.
So definitely the final question, then an observation at the end. So Claire Grinwell asks, have you ever tried any conditioned diversions over there to deter gulls depredating eggs?
No, we haven't, but I'm not too sure how successful it would be. There, the island, when you're walking around the island in summer, there are sand eels as thick as your finger, as long as a biro, scattered around the place. There are eggs, unhatched eggs. There are dead chicks. There's discarded food. There's an abundance of food for birds to pick up on the periphery, and whether they could be attracted to a feeding station adjacent to the site or not, I don't know. But I would caution that it may draw in additional birds that may, because of their proximity, just alternate onto the main island.
Right. And then the observation from Edward Ross said, it's interesting to see the differences you guys, weather impacts and seasons. Roseate Tern South Africa breed during late winter, and listening to what we've been saying about winter weather storms, it'd be interesting if any of South African ringbirds might have been recorded in the colonies some years and vice versa, I suppose, blown off course. Are you aware of that at all?
No, I'm not aware of any interchange in that respect.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe one day to look at that.
Maybe,
Well,
yeah.
look, a massive thank you to you, Tony, and helping to sort of end this session, and also, of course, to Paul and Steve. What I think's been great is obviously talking about the established colonies across Britain and Ireland. I think, in a sense, to trying to find out what's been going on, where the similarities are, where the differences are. I think we've learned a huge amount, and just massive congratulations to all three of you and your teams for what you've been doing on with those colonies. Before we break for lunch, I've got a special thing to say, actually, about the wonderful Paul Morrison, because pretty much nearly all of Coquet Island's history has been associated with Paul. This year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Coquet Island as a RSPB nature reserve, and this is the man who's been running for 36 years, I've said. So I'm going to say a few little things. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Daniel, who's been sort of coordinating the live project, who's going to make Paul blush. So Paul, you have to turn on your camera now, actually, Paul. I know, hopefully you're still there, you haven't run out and because we're going to try and make you blush a little bit. So the first thing I want to say is just, as I said before, Rim, a massive thank you for the 36 years of looking after this really special place. You were very kind to allow me to be on the island for 15 minutes a few years back, which I thought was about the limit you'd allow anyone to go on there who's not really reputable. I have to say, you were both generous and in your time in terms of explaining what we've been doing and obviously showing me the site, but also I think you rather enjoyed making me have the fright of my life as we tried to get the rib out of the Amble Harbour, because the swell on the sea was pretty dramatic, and I was just precariously sat on the edge of your rib, and I was getting paler and paler, but eventually we just about managed to get over the peaks of the waves, and you were kind enough to give me 15 minutes just to have a chat with Wes at the time, I think it was the warden, and see the roseates, and then I think you rescued me and we got you home. So I think that pretty much the whole of your time with Coca has been one of generosity, of dedication, and also creativity. The stories that you tell about how you keep good relations with the owner, of course, the Duke of Northumberland, is extraordinary. I know of no other site manager who will organise an annual petanque competition to actually not only, and then graciously lose every year, if I think I'm correct, and therefore then to ensure that the little dents made in the ground as a result of the petanques end up becoming useful nesting habitat for the terns. I think that I've seen you write something like 500 terns now use the petanque field. So I think the extraordinary way in which you manage the relationship with the Duke, the fact that you deliver this incredible increase in roseate tern colonies is just a testament to your extraordinary career. And I just wanted to say personally from me to you, thank you for looking after the roseates at Coca. Whenever I look at it from my heart, I'm very grateful that it's under your control. And now I'm going to hand over to Daniel, actually, who I think wants to say a few words as well. So over to Daniel.
Hi everyone. I'm just one moment. I'm sort of so sorry for the bad quality experience for Paul, because I know, as always, he puts 110% and as well his team to preparing it. But you were a guinea pig. But you always come up with the best solutions. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the last 50 years of Coquette and more specifically about Paul, because he managed the reserve for over 70% of this time, of this incredible time. And I was hugely privileged to share amazing field trips with the three guys you just heard from, Steve, Steve, Tony, and Paul. These are the guys. This is during our French trip to advise the French colleagues on how to set up the nest boxes and terraces. Just amazing people, and thank you very much for all what you do. But from now on, it will be to Paul, make him blush. I think he developed his love for nature quite early in his life, securing seabirds from a local oil spill. And his play for personality extends to all sorts of creatures, mammals and featherly alike. Apart from, of course, the gulls and the seals that want to take his reserve. So here, early years as a countryside manager, I think he takes his drive from enormous need for caring, and also general positivism that Paul is kind of sharing all over the place. Is something that makes me sort of get going in the low times when during my sorry, I'm just getting something is switching off here. But just coming back, Paul, I'm sorry. This is just you know, uniform for when you work for the Trinity House, and on the board of Patricia, giving, you know, presentation about Coquette to the passengers there. Just to make it even worse for you, I mean, you fell off in Coquette so much that you got married on the island, and then raised up your children in the passion for the sea and speedboat. Well, in the result of it, your daughter emigrated to Australia, but as far as I know, your beloved Isabel is still with you in Humble. Early photos of Coquette, it hasn't been like that, like you've just seen on Paul's presentation. This photo on the left was taken in 1989, shows John Osborne standing outside of reserve shed, which used to be your accommodation in that time, holding a bottle of the 1989 rhubarb wine, produced by Lighthouse Keepers, I believe. And that's the photo in the middle of terraces area, without terraces, of course, and the vegetation in the lighthouse garden, which you over the years, I must say, is probably took you years to bring to the you know, sort of condition that it's now. And incredible sort of creativity in terms of what we can improve on the Coquette. On the left, you can see the first DIY sort of robot mower for everyone who is on the you know, sort of from health and safety in the audience. I can assure you it was just a little bit of fun. The real job of mowing these patches for sandwich terns and common terns takes hours and hours of the team to accomplish. And obviously on the right there is the photo of the terraces as they are now. So much better situation than previously. Well, Paul is known for the love of petanque, and Martin already said he plays every year with Duke of Northumberland. This year he couldn't organize a game, so he made a special tool and made the holes himself, which was, and he's also, you know, quite known for his approach, military approach to gull management, sort of playing around here, of course, on this photo, scaring gulls in all sorts of ways. The bottom photo here is with the scary man, in sort of like a pneumatic scarecrow. But everybody who knows Paul for a little bit knows as well that he's developed over the years some kind of puffin fetish. I don't know how many outfits he hides all over the place. These are just a small selection of those. He's an incredible gadget man as well. And I just have a small sort of sample of his admiration for some of the technology. We were lucky to buy him to play around.
Welcome behind the scenes on Coquette Island. This is one of our wildlife cameras viewed from our security camera. We have several cameras around the island to guard the Roseate Terns because they're so special. But at quiet moments we can enjoy the puffins enjoying looking at the cameras. We enjoy the cameras looking at the puffins.
That's it. Like all great men, Paul is many things. He's got Scottish roots. He's European. He celebrates all Celtic, you know, history, but most importantly, he's Parisian. If he's not on Coquette, he's in Paris, you know, sort of driving his scooter around and, you know, fetching baguettes and, you know, participating in local protests. In his characteristic for Paul, you know, sense of humor. But enough about Paul, because Paul is galvanizing amazing team of volunteers and professional wardens, and these are just few photos from you know, sort of events or every year kind of themed parties that I always just receive, you know, videos. Daniel, where are you? You know, we're missing you. Sort of like, you know, no, I'm doing, you know, spreadsheets and reports, but they are just incredible in terms of creativity and sense of you know, sort of celebration of achievements, and all of them, you know, David, Ibrahim, Chris, Tom, Hilary, Stephen, are special people, and they are just amazing bunch of completely dedicated guys, and I've been in you know, admiration for you guys, and I would like to thank you for what you're doing on Coquette. It's really special, and Paul, I think you've achieved, you know, incredible things with your team, and I just wish you all, you know, all the best for another 50 years, where we will achieve, you know, a few hundreds of Roseate Terns, no doubt, with the level of dedication you have. But I will allow Paul to thank on the small video, and then you might want to say something as well before lunch.
On behalf of the RSPB and the thousands of seabirds on Coquette Island, like the 25,000 pairs of puffins that we have here, without your help, of the supporters, the membership, and of course the volunteers, without all that help, we just couldn't keep going. We couldn't offer the protection and safeguard for the 70,000 nesting seabirds here on Coquette Island. So on their behalf, thank you very much.
Go on, Paul, you have to say something on the back of that.
Oh dear, I'm very moved, very touched by your kindnesses. My efforts are just one of coordination, really. As I said earlier, the team on Coquette is amazing. They're everything. They are the guys that drive luckily the successes that we enjoy on Coquette. We work hard, we play hard. You've probably already guessed, we don't have a telly on Coquette. We make up our own entertainment. And just 2 days ago, we had a scything competition on Coquette. That took a risk assessment and a half, but we all dressed for the part with straw hats and etc. So, and another amazing event on Coquette Island. And every year we get Stephen Lund, the local blacksmith volunteer. He always makes a little present for us, forges something as a memento. So my house now is weighted down with all these souvenirs that Stephen makes for the whole team and for myself as well, of course. But that team spreads through to the academic world with Chris Redfern, and of course, there's too many to name, but the help that everybody comes together with all their different talents has been so enjoyable. It's something that keeps me going on Coquette. There's always something new, there's always something special, and there's always hope, and that's what we aim for. And thank you, everybody.
Brilliant. We'd love to be able to spray you with champagne or something, or give you something like a baguette to whack you over the head with, but apparently that's going to happen in November when the committee meets. So look, a massive thank you, Paul and the team, and Daniel, and just for saying what you did. I think that you speak on behalf of the whole of the RSPB and our membership.